Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning to this Zoom symposium today at the University of Applied Arts at the Angewandte in Vienna. I had a quick search yesterday in my computer. I wanted to have a short look of how many times I've already been writing articles and facilitating conferences and panel discussions on circular strategies issues. And I was quite astonished. In 15 years of working as a journalist and as a host and moderator, I wrote roughly about 250 articles that are dealing with circular strategies in a general or even in a specific way. And I had the chance to facilitate about 25 panel discussions and conferences that were focusing on ecological footprint, on decarbonization, and on life cycle management issues in planning and building. I take that as a symbol that means that we do already know a lot about this topic. And I take this as a symbol to know that there is already a huge amount of experience and expertise in these issues. I think we are happy to share some great pilots and best practice projects worldwide within the last 5 or 10 years. But still, I think that all of you who are joining us today for this conference, all of you who are contributing in a discussion or in a lecture way, you're all of you pioneers, each in its way. And I think that it's still important more and more to share this knowledge, to spread it, and let's say to make conferences as we have it today not necessary anymore in the future. My wish is that this kind of conference to talk about circular strategies will be obsolete in hopefully 5 or 10 years, and that all of it that we will be discussing today will become standard. Let's hope. I think we have to contribute to that. For that, I'm very happy to guide you through today's conference, Circular Strategies Towards a Sustainable Built Environment. We're here at the Angewandte at the University of Applied Arts, and this event today is cooperation with the Vienna Design Week. We do live stream on Facebook and on YouTube. And all of you who are listening, you will also have the possibility to tune in, to ask questions in a written way, or also with raising your blue hand and asking your questions into the camera. And I will be happy when we do the discussions later to get you in and also to give you the chance to ask your questions. There will be 2 keynotes today at noon, and then we'll have 3 panels focusing on different topics. And I very much like this way the Angewandte team structured this conference today. We will start with small scale, so reuse of building components, design and components for reuse. We will continue with medium scale reuse of buildings, where we go to the facility itself, and we will finish today's conference with the large scale, talking about urban areas and landscape strategies. But before we go into the topics, before we really enter in the content, I would kindly ask Gerald, Bast, Rector of the University of Applied Arts, to open today's event very, very officially. Gerald, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Wojciech. Thank you very much for this meaningful introduction. It made me think about what we are doing and how we are doing it. And I'm sure it's not only me who had to think about the efficiency of what we are doing at universities. But that's another topic. Maybe I come back later on. Architecture is a series of desperate, over-specialized and unevenly distributed products. Friedrich Kiesler wrote this sentence in his essay on Correalism a long time ago. Well, we could question Kiesler's proposition on the state of architecture, but what we should not question is his statement, architecture is a socially constructive factor. Yes, we do know architecture is wasting resources, a lot of resources, mainly non-renewable resources. But it would be too simple just blaming architects. Architecture is a part of our global economic system. We know this, and some of us are suffering from this situation, but that's what it is. An economic system with unlimited growth, rapid cycles of consumption, maximizing shareholder value. These are the paradigms of the system. And this is the very situation and environment where architects are working in. Of course, universities are about to, and it's the task of a university to prepare young people for working in this existing environments. But universities, and I always mention this, universities also have the privilege, or even more, they have the duty, the obligation to think and to do research about how to break paradigms. And having heard what Wojciech said in his introduction, I think we should not only research on how to break paradigms in the area of the contents, especially environmental issues, but we also should intensify how to make it possible to bring it down on the bottom, what we did research, get into action. Science, architecture, this is part of a social environment. And so we also have a social responsibility, not only to think about how it works, but also to think about how we can make it happen. The University of Applied Arts always was about to see architecture, see a university as a social factor in the society. And so I'm proud once more that this university is committed to this obligation and meeting this challenge by having organized this special conference, even under very difficult conditions. Many thanks to Karin Raith and Lukas Allner, and I wish you all the best for the conference, an inspiring day, and hopefully a lot of fruits with for the future, not only debates, but also for future action. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Thank you also for your important and great words. May I add a question? You mentioned this quote of Kiesler that doesn't sound very, very happy. Architecture was a series of desperate, unequally distributed products. If we look at that, what Kiesler said many, many decades ago, what would be your personal wish, your personal vision for the future?
My wish would be that we should try to translate what Kiesler claimed some, I think, 80 years ago, to see architecture as a part of social environment, and that architecture not so much has to look at its isolated sphere about material, about form, about function, but also function in the meaning, what is architecture? What can architecture contribute to a societal environment? So, well, I may say it, the opposite to what Patrick Schumacher once said, an architect is not a social worker. Of course, architects are not social workers, but architects have the obligation to look at what they are producing in the society, and they have the obligation to look at what they could provide for the benefit of the society, and looking at which kind of grand challenges we have in this time, from climate change to migration to changing situations in an aging society. There are a lot of challenges we have to meet, and architecture has to provide its parts to find a solution.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the opening. Before we come to the first keynote, I would invite Karin Raith, University of Applied Arts, from the Building Construction Department at the Institute of Architecture, who together with Lukas Allner is one of the two, let's say, operative and conceptual heads who really contributed to make this conference today happen. And Karin, I would like to invite you to share with us your thoughts about how did this idea to run a circular strategies conference, how did this evolve? What is your vision for today? And also what is your vision for the next years and decades in architecture, in planning and building? Karin.
Yeah, thank you, Wojciech. I want to greet everybody, and I'm very glad to be there, and that already so many people joined us. Gerald, Bast already gave some reasons why we address this topic, so I will try to share my screen now. Why did we organize this symposium, and why do we think that circular economy in architecture is an important topic? We know that since the Industrial Revolution, energy and material turnover has been growing exponentially and has reached a critical level. The global extraction of materials has more than doubled in the last 30 years. Natural resources are consumed beyond their regenerative capacity, and unfortunately, it must be said that the construction sector is largely responsible for this. At present, the global building industry consumes 35 to 40% of energy, depending on what you include in the calculation, 20% of water, and about half of all resources that are extracted from the earth worldwide, such as ores, sand, gravel, and stone. It's responsible for about 1/3 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Cement production alone accounts for about 7 to 10 of the global CO2 emissions. And what is surprising in comparison, I didn't believe that, the global air traffic is only 2 to 3%. These figures are not completely up to date, but they can give us an indication. And I think Helga Weisz, who will be speaking right after me, may have more detailed information to offer. In recent decades, not only have more and more natural resources been extracted from the environment, but also more and more land has been consumed for construction. This is, of course, in line with the logic of continuous economic growth and is also driven by a combination of many factors, primarily by exponential population growth, but also by the extensive use of fossil fuels, which allows transport over longer distances and thus stimulates urban sprawl. This is fatal because the surface of the earth is a limited resource that cannot be reproduced, enlarged, or expanded. Land is a really precious commodity. Although we know that in the future more arable land will be needed to feed the growing number of people, we allow huge fertile areas to fall victim to urbanization and be lost to food production every year. And as the consumption of land through urbanization has accelerated, also nature has been pushed back at the same pace. We are well aware that the natural soil with its ecological functions is absolutely essential for human survival. Nevertheless, we thoughtlessly waste it for scattered development and the immense traffic areas required in between. So what can we do? What can we architects do? As already mentioned, the global construction sector is responsible for about 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, Roughly half of this is caused by the operation of buildings, and the other half is related to the energy used for the production of the buildings. It's important to pay attention to both aspects. Thermal refurbishment of existing buildings and also energy efficient new buildings can reduce the emissions from building operation. That's what is here on the left side. But what about the other half? There are a lot of considerations. Some argue for a dematerialization of architecture because lightweight construction would reduce the amount of material put into the built environment. This would lead to a reduction in both the extraction of natural material from the environment and the embedded energy in the buildings. If we think this thought consistently to its end, then we must say the most sustainable architecture is no architecture at all. If we were satisfied with already exists, this would be the solution with the smallest ecological footprint. Others are convinced that it makes more sense to recycle building materials and use them many times. But there is a catch here too. Recycled materials may not have the same quality as new ones. Recycled aggregates in concrete, for example, have a lower performance than natural aggregates, which means that more cement may be needed to achieve the same strength, and this would increase the CO2 emissions of the concrete again. So it might be better to leave the concrete where it is and improve the intact building. Another option would be designed for durability. Should buildings be designed in a way that we can use them longer? When does it make sense to preserve an existing building? When it is better to tear it down and build a new, green one? So we see that the answers are not so easy to give, and it is necessary to weigh up arguments. Wojciech already told something about the structure of our symposium. Since different levels of scales with different degrees of complexity are involved, we thought it would be useful to symposium according to these three scale levels and discuss the subject from two different perspectives. First, by considering the past and asking how to deal with things that already exist. And second, by looking ahead. How can we design cities, neighborhoods, buildings and components today so that they are still usable tomorrow and can be adapted to future needs? Of course, strategies are most effective if they are designed for the largest possible scale, ideally for the entire planet. But the small scale is also relevant because of the sheer mass of materials and components that are used in the global construction industry. Our aim should be to radically reduce the extraction of raw materials from natural sources and instead exploit the reservoirs of civilization by reusing materials that have already been taken from nature, processed and accumulated in the cities. Cities are really amazing material deposits. It is estimated, for example, that more copper is now found in buildings than has remained in the Earth's crust. Therefore, it makes sense to raise these treasures, which is so aptly expressed by the term urban mining. Today, Annette Hillebrand will address this aspect, among others. Actually, the recycling of building materials is nothing new. It has been practiced for centuries. For example, stones that had already been cut into handy shapes and were available on site were preferred to stones that had to be mined and transported over long distances. And what was sometimes also important, a connection to history could be established by using its relics and benefiting from the dignity or grandeur of the past. Therefore, we find many Roman spolia in medieval buildings in Italy, for example, columns and architraves and wall coverings and so on. And there has also been a widespread culture of repair in pre-industrial times, which was dictated by necessity on the one hand, but also motivated by a sense of aesthetics. In order to benefit from both the material and the specific shapes of architectural relics, about 3 years ago, Tobias Nolte experimented with a software that can identify the geometry of the parts and then arrange them in new configurations. Here you see a successful result, his installation, Mind the Scrap. As I have already suggested, the reuse of building materials is not only relevant in terms of CO2 reduction and the conservation of primary resources, but also has a cultural and political dimension. When the Chinese architecture practice Amateur Architecture Studio reused the rubble of the destroyed villages that had been forced to make way for the hasty urbanization in China, this was both a practical consideration and a manifesto. It preserved the memory of the destroyed everyday culture and its crafts. It made people aware that the skillfully manufactured components with their long tradition had not only a material value, but also a cultural significance. I personally have the impression that the efforts of Wang Shu and Lu Wenyu marked a turning point in dealing with the past, and that many Chinese architectural offices today refer to their practice and architectural ideas. Perhaps even O office, we will learn more from Yin Jiang this afternoon. When the layers of building elements are glued together, they cannot be disassembled into their individual parts after the end of the first life cycle and will become waste. So if we want to prepare the components for future reuse, we have to avoid inseparable composites. We must rethink the joints and connections and move to a consistent design for disassembly. This is also a very important task. Therefore, I'm convinced that these requirements will give rise to a new culture of joining with its own design language. On the scale level of the individual buildings, circular strategies concern, on the one hand, the adaptive use of already existing architecture, and on the other hand, the intelligent conception of new buildings with regard to their long-term usability. The appropriation and adaptation of existing buildings is not a new thing either. It has been practiced repeatedly throughout history, especially in times of crisis when raw materials were expensive and little energy was available. The challenge today is still the same: to improve buildings and adapt them to changed social, economic, cultural, and ecological requirements, while investing as little material and energy as possible. When existing buildings are reinterpreted and supplemented, we can see that this often enriches the architecture in an amazing way, creating a complexity and tension that the original building did not have. An example you can see here, Lina Bobardi's Sesc Pompeia project in Sao Paulo. In this respect, reuse does not mean a restriction of creativity, but rather a different approach, an approach that requires specific design skills. Even banal and unsatisfactory architecture does not have to be torn down and replaced by completely new structures, but can be upgraded, as the work of Lacaton Vassal impressively demonstrates. For us, the architects are important pioneers and role models of circular strategies, and we borrowed their motto today. The conversion of these 3 residential blocks in Bordeaux has been recently awarded the EU Mies van der Rohe Prize. An unpopular, unattractive social housing complex has been converted into a high standard apartment block with about 50% more living space and 60% less heating costs at less than a third of the cost of demolishing the existing building and constructing a new one of comparable standard. This proves, I think, that astonishing leaps in quality can be achieved and that this also pays off economically. Not to mention the employment aspect of the more labor-intensive conversions. So how can we program a building today for reuse in the future? Should it be a modular structure that can be dismantled and rebuilt differently? Or shall we rather design a building that is open to use because there are enough neutral, more or less unprogrammed spaces that can be appropriated by the users in different ways? This, again, is Lacaton-Vasal's approach. Ideally, the spatial units cannot only change their function for apartments or office or something else, but also their configuration by subdividing them or merging them into larger units. For sure, there are many more approaches. I come to the last scale. At present, we are observing the phenomenon of the so-called donut effect in villages and cities of various sizes. Low density settlement expansions pour into the periphery, supermarkets, all kind of commercial buildings, and immense traffic areas swallow up agricultural land, while the village centers are neglected, abandoned, and fall empty. The infrastructure decays, economic activity declines, and social life erodes. Therefore, we must radically reduce development of additional urban areas as long as there are vacancies and is insufficiently used building stock. We cannot take any more time. The situation requires a radical rethinking. We must ensure that cities can adapt to change through continuous adjustments in their interior, that poorly used areas are recycled, that existing neighborhoods are improved, and that the city will only expand outwards if rapid population growth requires it. To sum up, we think that circular economy in architecture and urban planning is a promising way to counteract a number of pressing problems: climate change driven by the enormous emission of greenhouse gases, the scarcity of natural resources, the waste of precious land. The tasks facing architects and designers are complex and demanding, but we must see the challenges not as constraints, but as an opportunity to develop new design methods. Reusing things does not mean renouncing innovation. Quite the contrary, it will stimulate imagination and inventiveness.
Thank you, Karin. You gave us an overview on those three different scales. I know this is not a very scientific approach, no? Now maybe a more journalistic one if I ask you, but could you tell us where do you think at the moment for the next years it will be most important to really invest knowledge, know-how, and to do something on the micro scale of the product, on the medium scale of built architecture, or on the large scale of urban cities?
I think there's a lot of research going on at the moment, especially in the small scale, and there are already some really interesting and successful examples of how to act in the medium scale. We will see some examples today. The biggest problems, I think, are on the largest scales, and this is also the scale where our action is the most effective. But as you know, this is very much a political problem, and as soon as we are not able to agree on strategies, on concrete steps, on concrete measures, this will always be something which is a little in the background compared to the efforts and also to the progress which is made on the two smaller scales. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. The one picture that we see at your shared screen at the moment, office. I think it's in Shenzhen or near Shenzhen. Those architects will also talk to us today.
Mm-hmm.
So something happened with
I stopped my screen. Okay.
Something happened with my screen. Everything is black. Now I can see you again. Thank you. So now we will come to our first of two keynote speeches. I will ask Helga Weisz to start with a step back in history. She will talk about energy revolutions and material cycling in Earth and human history. So she will go back to the Homo sapiens history. I don't know how many thousand years she will go back, but she will tell us a little bit about impact of human society, impact of building shelter and building cities throughout the last years, throughout the last thousands of years, and when exactly it changed, and from what kind of point we, let's say, we build up a certain inequality and imbalance of energy that we take and energy that we give. Helga, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research at the Humboldt-University, Berlin, Germany. We will now come to our second keynote. Josep Ricard from Harquitectes in Catalonia in Spain, based in Barcelona and in Sabadell, is an architect and is an office who already many times worked with the genius loci, with what you have already in the city, with what you already have in old buildings. It's an architecture office with much expertise on reuse and recycle, on those 3 R's that Helga Weisz told us about. And they won many awards, among them Brick Award, European Award for Architectural Heritage Invention, and also shortlisted several times for the EU Mies van der Rohe Award. I've written 1 or 2 times already about a project by you, Josep, and now I'm looking forward to have your explanation why and how you exactly do what you do. And you wrote me that you will present 8 strategic positions of your office, so we are looking forward to hear and see them now. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Well, thanks for the invitation. I'm sorry that, well, I'm not sorry, but it's true that the change of a scale and the ambition of the explanation, it will be far different from the very interesting lecture before. I will just try to explain 8 basic ideas of the office. It's true that we deal a lot with heritage, we deal a lot with pre-existing buildings, but in fact, for us, it's not far different. The pre-existence of organized material in form of a building is not different from the pre-existing material in terms of products that already exist in the market, or the pre-existing conditions. That means the climate around us. So I think that we are always working with the pre-existence. Doesn't matter if there's a building already there or just social, economic, climate conditions. First idea I want to talk about is that something that, well, you have to understand, it's 20 years of the office and we just have 8 ideas to explain. That means less than 1 idea every 2 years. That means that maybe that we are not too smart, but for sure that kind of strategies has become very important for the office. Our interest for the vernacular came from the very beginning of the office because we are 4 partners, 4 friends that we began to study together, and when you work as a team, as an architectural team, 4 people, it's very important to take away of the discussions the personal desire. It doesn't mean that you can be architect by your personal desires, but to be a team of architects based on personal desires is impossible. And so we've worked during all these 20 years by placing on the table of discussions as objective topics as possible, and also in parallel something that has been a very helpful reference, which is the vernacular constructions. And this is because when you're 4 people working together, the vernacular implies a non-linguistic language, so a non-representative language. This is that the idea of anonymous. It's very simple to be shared between 4 people with different interests. So that's why from the very beginning of the office, vernacular became a very important source of reference. With time, we have understood that what is very interesting from that kind of construction is not because of the non-language facades that anonymous presence, but the high level of efficiency of that kind of constructions, the very efficient amount of material to take to get a function, to get a very specific function. From that point of view, we have discovered during that 20 years that vernacular is not something that just exists in the past. From that point of view, from that approach, that idea of efficiency, we can understand that vernacular is something that, as Jacques Ferrier, the French architect, told us, can be something contemporary, so something that we can find out around us, with a lot of examples in agricultural stuff, but not only there, also in self-construction and so on. Is that kind of Rudowski architecture without architects that can still be found out, at least in our agricultural and urban surroundings. So we've been dealing with that interest with vernacular from the very beginning of the office, but turning to that approach based on efficiency. And also during the years, we have also trying to understand on the traditional vernacular, the idea of availability is pretty important. And the availability in the old vernacular, the pre-existence vernacular, is always based on geographical conditions. What is available means what is close to you. But today, we are in the discussion between what is available in terms of geographical conditions. For example, this house was made 15 years ago. It was a project with a very low budget, and we developed the complete house just with the resources of a town. The clay bricks made in the closest place, built just by the people of the town, the carpenter of the town, the masonry of the town. So it was an example of vernacular based, or contemporary vernacular based on geographical conditions. By the same time, we did this house done with KLH panel, contra-laminated timber panels. The same moment, 15 years ago, here in Spain, a low embodied energy product with a very efficient way of transportation. But 15 years ago, in terms of energy waste and economic budget, the previous example, the vernacular based on geographical, was better at the end than the second example. Today is completely different, at least in Spain, because there's more competence, there's more companies working with that kind of low embodied products. So the transportation is better, and so now we think that maybe the idea of contemporary vernacular is turning clearly to an economical condition than to a geographical condition. Second idea I want to explain is that idea that as a designers that we are, as architects that we are, we have the clear idea that we don't have to project the object. We have to project the performance, and not only the performance of people, but also the performance of building. construction for us is not the idea of design an object, but to design the conditions to promote, to make easy that preview, that project, which means to understand what will happen in the buildings. Not only what will happen in terms of experience for the users, but also what will happen in the building itself to produce conditions. And at the end, we have discovered that the only chance that we have as architects is to define, well, this is a very strong idea for us, that to propose that conditions to make the living perform possible, we have to use what is in the nature of the building. That means that we have to recover for the challenge of architecture the idea that we have to produce comfort. And to produce comfort, not only a physical comfort, also an emotional comfort, but to produce this comfort, we have to use radically what is in the nature of the building itself. That means geometry and material. We cannot be confident on the help of machines. Of course that our buildings have machines, but if we want to make our buildings keep in the place for 100 years and to take advantage from these materials like low embodied or no low embodied energy, we have to be very sure that the building will work as a machine of comfort forever, let's say forever. And this is only possible if, as organized material that produces comfort, the comfort has to be based on the nature of the building, not in the efficiency of a machine. Well, from that 3 steps, I just show you something that, of course, my wife hates, which is this kitchen, but for us is a perfect example of this idea that we have to preview, we have to project what will happen. This is the idea of project. We have to design the conditions to make it possible, but at the end, our only responsibility is to take decisions in terms of geometry and matter. The same with this garden. This is a student's residence close to the architectural school in Barcelona, well, in Sant Cugat, where we teach, 2 of us. And we just design, we design conditions, but we preview, we project life in terms of perform, thanks to the behavior of the building. Third idea, we have discovered, well, of course that our discoveries are really amateur, so because maybe naive, but it's 20 years of dealing with this idea of search in the nature of the building itself. How can it produce and propose comfort conditions that cannot get broken? And in this way, we have discovered how important is the air, because the air is that kind of interface that give conditions to the building as a climate and give conditions to the user, because in between the architectural decisions and people, there's air. This is something naive to say, really something obvious, but I want to make a reflection in this sense that it's because the air is transparent, let's say, that is invisible. In a society like ours, where the visual perception is so important, maybe it's the basic perception system. We have decided, let's say from 75 years ago, that as we don't see the air as a part of architecture, we have decided that it's not important. So as the air in fact is really important, we have give to the engineers and to the climate machine system the challenge to produce the final comfort conditions. Well, this is something that we are really worried about, and we try to deal with that idea in every project, trying to recover for the challenge of architecture, that idea that we have to give shape and qualify the air, but based on geometrical and material conditions, like in this building called Cristalleria Esplanell. This is a civic center where is a part of heritage too, because it's a pre-existing glass craft industry, where we have tried to give comfort conditions based on the nature and the behavior of the construction. This is a very basic and very easy to understand system based in inertia. In our climate here in the south, it's but in a Mediterranean climate where the day average and the seasons average change a lot. We really believe that the perfect mix between architecture and comfort conditions is to work with inertia and natural cross ventilation. The inertia is that amount of mass that help you keeping the excess of heat or humidity and giving it back when you need it. So, and this is only possible if during the nights you have that cross ventilation that take off the building that excess of heat that the inertia has kept during the day. In this building is basically this structural walls with a lot of inertia, giving that help to make the temperatures as soft as possible. But the challenge in this building was that to get cross ventilation, as this is a classrooms building basically, and it's not possible to get a real cross ventilation because of the central corridor and the noise, we tried to place here, and this is a public facility, which is not easy. We placed here what it's a natural engine that moves 15,000 meters of air per hour, and is based completely in geometrical and matter conditions, because this is a sand chimney, but it has any engine, it hasn't, and just works by its natural shape, and because of a greenhouse effect, because of Venturi effect, because of chimney effect, and so on. Of course, that we need the help of the engineers to do a lot of simulations in terms of thermodynamics, but we don't need we try to find out that kind of engineers that have the same idea that we have to give comfort as maximum as possible with something that never get broke, like geometry and material. Well, because we really believe that in terms of sustainability, the target is not the object, the target is the use that we get from the object. Of course, that is obvious that this is a car, fuel, gas, and so on is a waste of energy and is a problem for our system and for our planet. But the pre-existing material, the pre-existing non-efficient object that we have around us, like buildings, we have to understand that the problem is not the object itself, because if the object by the time or thanks to the number of people that use the object, or thanks to a second life, we can understand then that very inefficient and waste of material and energy, much like this, can become something less problematic for our planet. Then we try to of course that when it's possible, we try to use low embodied energy materials and products. But for us, it's far more important. As for us, it's very important in our climate area, that idea of use of inertia. The inertia is very difficult to be placed with timber systems and so on. So in our buildings, in general, we use structural walls where there's bricks, there's a lot of products that came from a high temperature process, which is not pretty interesting in terms of energy and climate. But we try to produce that idea of natural behavior objects that can keep in the place as maximum of time as possible, thinking always on how the user has to become part of the process, using the architecture to produce natural conditions inside. Like in this case, which is a south face gallery, that is the only income of heat to this house. This is a house with a non-heating system, very well insulated, with cross ventilation, that south facade that works as a gallery in winter and as a open facade in summer. And it's the only income of energy to the house. It works perfectly well, but thanks to the idea of use, because this house only can work in this way if the user is have that knowledge or that complicity to use the object in a proper way. In general, we are not far different from the rest of the architects. There's a lot of complexity in our projects. We try to solve every problem. We try to introduce in the big arithmetics of the project the demands of the client, the demands of norms, laws, climate, geometry of the place, and so the budget, and so on and so on. Maybe what we think is characteristic of our strategies is that we try to use the basic parts of construction, which are structure and enclosure, to perform in higher number of behaviors possible. We ask the structure not only to be the part that supports living of people, but also to become, thanks to the inertia, part of the comfort system, thanks to the shape of the structure, part of the acoustic comfort, to be part of the active system by activating pavements or slabs, and so on. And the same with enclosure, asking the enclosure to open and close, and not to be only the rainproof layer of the building, but also to be part of the comfort system by producing cross ventilation, by producing shadows, and so on. So that's the concept of that idea, which is to transform the elemental parts of the building into fundamental parts of the building, like in this case, where the structure of this building, which is heavy, which is based on cement because it's concrete, which is no good in terms of material for the environment, but thanks to that idea of become fundamental, because it's not only the structure, but is also the inertia that gives that balance to the outside temperatures, and also is the system that produce the inside ventilation because of these pipes introduced in the slab, or because it's part of the acoustic comfort system because of the shape of the concrete surface. And it's also the active system because it has active pavements and active slabs with circuits of cold and hot water. Suddenly that elemental part of a building became something fundamental, something, let's say, forever. And that building assumes that there's a part that is renewal, it is can be changed in time, like is the enclosure, but there's an heritage part of the building that can be there forever because, and this is important, will work forever. Not only as a structure, because structure is cheap to be demolished, is cheap to be changed. What can make people to think again about why we don't have to demolish something is when that something keep working. And the work that we have to ask to architecture is not just a support work, because this is very easy to be changed in future. For sure, there will be better structural systems. But if this system is part of the comfort, then, and the comfort is based in the nature of the system, then it won't be so easy to take the decision to demolish that. Well, another concept that we love is not a concept from us, that the idea that buildings that age organically comes from Ignacio Paricio, and very good architect from Barcelona and an incredible construction teacher that did design this library in an old infrastructure. This is a very old infrastructure from the 19th century to keep 3 meters water on the ceiling to give water to a very huge park here in the center of Barcelona. So you have to imagine that this is just a pure infrastructure that has become a beautiful space as a library, very well designed and so on. Well, Ignacio Paricio talked about that two kind of construction system. The multi-layer systems where every layer is very specific, very specialized to give an answer to a problem of comfort, in front of that kind of construction where space and structure is the same thing. So where structure and the geometry of the space is the same part of the building. That is the traditional construction based on structural walls and so on. What Paricio says is that both systems are very can work very well and are different, but there's no one better than the other. But what Paricio says, which is very interesting for us, is that that second system, where structure and space is the same thing, can age organically. That means that never gets broken, can become elder, but is not. And the other system, and you can imagine the skyscraper facade or a hospital or a big facility with a lot of machines and a lot of layers in the facade, always have to be new. When a skyscraper, it doesn't exist a vintage skyscraper facade. It's impossible because then it's not working, it's broken. But of course that this infrastructure can get older, can be a little bit ugly maybe because of time, but it never gets broken in terms of inertia, it never gets broken in terms of geometry, in terms of program, in terms of natural light conditions. So this is something that for us, maybe it will be less specialized, but can be there forever. And when we were young, we discovered a little bit this concept between structure and space, just crossing the Charlottenburg Pavilion or Schinkel, discovering that idea of the relation between space and structure. And I'll show you just, we've been dealing with that idea from the last 12, 15 years. And now we are in the idea that we can get that kind of architectures with one layer system. Like this is a house that we've done, just is a structural walls house, but there's nothing else than just one wall house. So the one wall house is a house without just one layer facade that can work as a rainproof system, as an insulation system, also as a structural system. And of course, it's giving the geometry to the inside spaces. Coming back again to that general concept that is the umbrella of the 8 ideas that I'm talking, that idea of the nature of the building, we develop a lot with this house. But I want to show this house just as another idea that for me is very nice, and it's not from us. It's from Jacques Zondelat, the French architect that in the 80s talk about that idea that for us is pretty important, and in this house I think that is well shown, that idea that the good place for living is not, he said that the functionalism is against the freedom of use. For me is a surprising sentence, because functionalism and freedom of use is in the basis of are the basic topics on the modern and contemporary architecture. But what Zondelat says, and his reflection, and for us is important, is that when the space is based on its function, then it's very difficult to have freedom to have a free interpretation of how we can use that space. And we, of course, that prefers that second approach to architecture based on offer the user a series of spaces that are specials, that are very specials because are very high, are with a lot of inertia, are very narrow, high, tall, natural light, no light, and not based in its function. Like this, for example, this courtyard that works as a sitting room in winter, as an atrium, as an entrance, as an office also in this house.
Josep, can I also, sorry for interruption, can I also give you 3 more minutes?
Yeah, the last topic I want to show you is the idea that when we are in front of the heritage, and we are always in front of heritage because there's always something there, like in this house, on an agricultural, well, in a very nice village, an agricultural plot close to the center of this old village with castle and so on, with an incredible nice wall with all that huge stones, a 3 meters high wall. We developed a house just like a porch linked to that long wall. And I show you just as an example of that position to the heritage or to the preexistence. We did that house, we designed that house based on that idea of closing the house to the wall. But when we went to the council, they asked us to demolish the wall because the street was too narrow for the cars and for the trucks. So the new drawing of the city asked to demolish this beautiful wall, and that was the basic reference for the project. When it was a big crisis, but from that problem shows up a strategy that for me is a good example to show that what is important when you are in front of the preexistence is that you have to understand not the memory is important, but far more important than the memory is the attributes of the heritage. The preexistent material has attributes, and in this case, this was a wall that means geometry and memory, but also means the availability and the potential of these stones to keep working there as a structural element, to keep working there as an inertia element for the house. So we demolished the wall as the council asked to us, but we rebuilt the wall with the same stones, but in this case with lime cement and with soil of the plot and with balls with air insulated to give also insulation conditions to the wall. And we've done a one wall house with the same stones that are linked to the same, with the same strategy, a large porch linked, glued to that new wall. Is a monoblock wall like the house I've shown before. And after the process, we've just smashed a little bit the surface of the that cyclopic concrete wall to recover the image of the old stones that now are placed just 1 meter away because of the council, but recovering the memory, but giving the heritage, giving the pre-existing material a new chance to perform, not only to give memories, not only to have a cultural perform, but to give conditions in terms of inertia and in terms of geometry to the perform of people into this house. And that will be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Beautiful projects, beautiful images. And you also need lots of effort and lots of energy when you, for example, restruct the old stone wall and you construct a new one with the same material as you showed in your last project. My question to you is, with all this architecture, with this ecological, with this circular approach that you have in your projects and also in your office, is this for you personally still an effort, or has it already become standard? So is it normal for you?
No, the advantage and the disadvantage of architecture and our personal approach to architecture is that there's no research if there's no a specific commission. We are not able to have general research process in the office. So for us, every project, and I can show you, maybe if you see our projects from outside, thanks to the magazines or through the box, people can have a general image of our projects. But every project for us is a specific and very funny research process. For example, the sun chimneys means like one complete year of research by doing simulations, trying to understand geometry to make possible that 15,000 meters air per hour moving. And this is very specific of the project. Of course, that our general approach is always the same, to be and that means that every project is a research process. So it's always a new process. Always hard, but it's the real engine of the office to make every project a research process.
What do you do with clients? I don't know if this happens, but you will tell us, that do not have such an approach as you do, or that do not have such a strong focus on a circular strategy. Do you persuade them? Do you say, thank you, bye-bye, we don't match? How do you deal with that?
Exactly like that. The very specific of our office is that from the very beginning, we understood that I think that we are more or less talent office, but talent in front of attitude is really the less important part of the equation. The attitude in front of the wall, in front of the climate deals, in front of the client demands is the important part. So from the very beginning of the office, when the client demands, for example, we've never done a house with a parking garage inside. I saw that it sounds very naive, it sounds very obvious, very basic, but we've never accepted a commission of a house with a car garage. And this is because in general, in all our houses, it's possible to park in other place, or the client already has a parking place, and that we are not here to deal with cars. And this is a position that means that you have to say goodbye to a lot of commissions.
Thank you. Next time we have to invite you to Austria and change architecture scene in Austria and build up some family houses without any garages. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. I'll be glad to be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your keynote also.